In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
But I do ask every publisher, every editor, and every newsman in the nation to re-examine his own standards and to recognize the nature of our country's peril. In time of war, the government and the press have customarily joined in an effort based largely on self-discipline to prevent unauthorized disclosures to the enemy. In times of clear and present danger, the courts have held that even the privileged rights of the First Amendment must yield to the public's need for national security. Today, no war has been declared, and however fierce the struggle may be, it may never be declared in the traditional fashion. Our way of life is under attack. Those who make themselves our enemy are advancing around the globe. The survival of our friends is in danger, and yet no war has been declared. No borders have been crossed by marching troops. No missiles have been fired. If the press is awaiting a declaration of war before it imposes the self-discipline of combat conditions, then I can only say that no war ever posed a greater threat to our security. If you are awaiting a finding of clear and present danger, then I can only say that the danger has never been more clear, and its presence has never been more imminent.
It's time to recognize that we've come to a turning point. We're threatened with an economic calamity of tremendous proportions, and the old business-as-usual treatment can't save us. Together, we must chart a different course. We must increase productivity. That means making it possible for industry to modernize and make use of the technology which we ourselves invented. That means putting Americans back to work, and that means, above all, bringing government spending back within government revenues, which is the only way, together with increased productivity, that we can reduce and, yes, eliminate inflation.
The only thing that can stop this corrupt machine is you. The only force strong enough to save our country is us. The only people brave enough to vote out this corrupt establishment is you, the American people. I'm doing this for the people and for the movement, and we will take back this country for you, and we will make America great again.
Hello and welcome to Inform America. I'm your host, Rich Merritt. A couple of things I want to talk about first before we get into the show. First and foremost, well, it isn't foremost, but first of all, is the Boston Broadside. I'd like you to take a look at them. I happen to know them. It's the people's paper that tells you the truth. What else can you want in your news other than the truth? You decide what's going on in the world based on the truth. Check them out, Boston Broadside. Give them a look. Secondly, I'd like to ask you to check out my book, Stand Your Ground. And I didn't know it when I gave it the name, or actually my brother gave it the name, but it's a good thing for all of us to stand our ground to get our country back. So check it out. At the end of the show, there's going to be a link you can go to and see if you like it or not. Thirdly, the National Liberty Alliance. Check them out more now than ever. And I'm going to drop a hint here. So you know, a court of record is common law. A court of record is land jurisdiction. A court of record is kryptonite to the criminal element in our government. I understand, I got very good news that a boatload of kryptonites headed to America in the very near future. And I'm optimistic and hopeful that it's going to come because our country and our government need it. So we'll see how that works out. Joining me today is Dan Rashad. I've come to know Dan, 3.5 years ago, I guess now, Dan.
Something
And
like that.
We've worked very closely on the state constitution and the federal constitution. And in my humble opinion, I happen to think that Dan Rashad is the foremost authority on the state constitution, more so than anyone in the state of New Hampshire that I've met, and I've met a number of people. With that, Dan's going to talk about what he has done over the past 3 years in dealing with the Constitution, in dealing with our government. So I don't know how you want to pick up on it, Dan, but...
Well, thank you for the kind words,
it's
Richie.
yours.
And want to start with the very beginning, what brought Richie and I together, which was several years ago. I came to the knowledge of the NLA, saw the presentation in Antonin Scalia's dissertation in the Williams case pertaining to the common law grand jury and the grand jury system here in the United States. And that's how our relationship began. And I then turned to see what happened to its existence here in New Hampshire. What Richie was alluding to earlier, the Common Law Court of Record is still in Part 2 form of government, Article 4. It's never been repealed. It's a matter of fact, something rather nefarious happened in 1966 where it was taken away. The people were deceived into converting their courts, the people's courts that had legislative oversight. You had the 400 members of the House and the 24 members of the Senate and the governor and council. What they didn't tell the voters is that by accepting the addendum of 72A and creating administrative courts that would operate very similar to admiralty courts but would never be called such. Anyway, I started investigating and educating myself onto how these things had come to be. And early on, I had the very very good revelation about Article 98 in Part 2 form of government that told the framers had us timestamp everything we did so that if we took a wrong turn along the way, we could know where those changes were made. And I used that as a template as I continued to investigate into the state constitution. Fast forward to September 31st of 2017, right? No,
17, you're right.
Sununu's first year in office. And I prepared a 15-page report, and Richie and 5 other men, one of our state reps, Ray Howard, went with us, and we met with the governor's attorney, John Formella. We expressed to him our concerns about what was going on in the state and that we were looking for reassurances that the things I had uncovered were, in fact, that there was some legitimate explanation for the changes, because the changes did not add up to the means by which the state constitution is amended and the very function of the state government. What was written down in the state constitution that's available on newhampshire.gov right now, it and what we have are not the same. So what turned into just an education about being informed about my state constitution and my rights turned into a full-blown investigation because I discovered what I believed to be criminal conduct, bad faith actions by state actors, and they had made dramatic changes to the function of our state government. So we turned that report over, and unfortunately we were really disappointed, Richie, that they never called us back. We got a Dear John letter, basically, that the governor didn't want to touch the issue. And and one of the major issues is that the changes to the judicial branch, the way that these things had been achieved, was in direct violation of the amendment process. So unfortunately, that was his position. So I filed a civil suit against Mr. Sununu on July 3rd of 2018, last summer. And unfortunately, because I had no training in law, operating pro se, I did not articulate the case in the manner in which legal cases are processed by these administrative courts.
Just can I interject, Dan?
Sure.
Then it wasn't properly done because of the procedures put forth by members of the bar.
Exactly.
Which is incorrect. I just wanted to throw that in. You don't
Absolutely.
have to go into detail. But
Yeah, absolutely, because that's what the fundamental issue is that they've made the function of a citizen attempting to get remedy for any bad actions of state government. They made it impossible to get any relief, get any remedy, unless you hire a member of their society. And because if you're right on the facts but you're wrong on procedure, they're going to argue the procedure, which is a classic tactic that attorneys will use. And so anyway, the case was the governor refused to answer. 37 days into the default, he went ahead and contacted the Attorney General. They used state resources to protect him, which they had a duty not to do. Statute 99D in the state statutes says quite clearly that any public official who's sued in his capacity, whether it's in his official capacity in the elected office or whether they've exercised powers not delegated to them, either way, they went ahead and did so. They showed up, had it summarily dismissed. The judge went along with it, and it was dismissed on procedure, and no one had to answer any questions. They, again, kicking the can down the road. So fast forward to May 20th of this year. More research, more effort, more teaching of myself, having to self-educate myself on, excuse me,
Bless you.
led me to prepare a different presentation called a remonstrance. And this is one of our rights under Article 32. In the Federal Bill of Rights, it's called the right to petition your government for redress of grievances. And in New Hampshire, that can be done one of two ways. You can petition the general court for redress of grievances that have befallen on you for the rightful execution of state government, and then by way of remonstrance as well, which is a different tactic. A remonstrance is a strong protest that one would serve on a legislative body in order to address issues that are illegal, and that's exactly what I did. So I filed a remonstrance with the Secretary of State's office, the governor's office, the clerk of the House, the clerk of the Senate, and that remonstrance gave notice that what they were doing was committing nonfeasance. In other words, they were exercising powers not delegated to the legislative or judicial branch or the executive branch. And
Can I jump in for a second?
Go ahead.
That remonstrance was submitted, in a timely fashion, and it was delivered appropriately to everyone, like Dan said. Just so you know, there was no hanky-panky or anything like that. It was done properly.
attached to the remonstrance was also a notice of trespass, the trespass on our rights, and my rights specifically. And so I made this presentation and got, as I expected, no response. And I followed up, called the House Counsel, Legal Counsel Jim Cianci for the state legislature, and had a conversation with him. It was followed up with Eileen Kelly, gave us a call and asked us to come up to the Speaker's house and Speaker's office, up to the State House. And we did so, and Richie came with me and one of my other research assistants and two of our state reps, and we had a sit down with them. And we explained to them that, look, the right as to who can vote in New Hampshire elections is rather straightforward. It's covered in Part 1, the Bill of Rights, Article 11, and Part 2, Form of Government, Article 30, Inhabitant Defined. Article 11 in the Bill of Rights is the right of elective franchise, the right to who can vote, and Article 30 is inhabitant defined. And Article 30 says basically, quote, "And every person qualified as the Constitution provides, comma, shall be considered an inhabitant for the purpose of electing or being elected into any office, town, or in the state, where they dwelleth and have a home." This is the basic language. What it says specifically, though, that's important to this conversation is, "And every person qualified as the Constitution provides." Not the legislature, not the executive, not the judicial branch. In other words, only the people who created and ratified and agreed to this form of government, the state constitution, can alter, amend, or abolish said government. So the legislature cannot create by statute that which the Constitution does not provide. So what they did by statute is they amended the definition of qualified voters to include residents. Residents have no constitutional rights. If you look at the state constitution, there's 39 articles today, 38 in the original, and constitutional rights are conferred to citizens of the state, and only citizens of the state can be qualified inhabitants, electors, those qualified to vote. So we brought that to their attention, and what's fundamentally been going on since 1973 is both branches or both political parties have been playing football with this. Each time a new party takes over control of the state house, or whether it's the governor's office or majorities in the legislature, they do the same thing. They continue to grant resident aliens, those would be citizens of the United States, born or naturalized in any one of the 49 states. When they move here, they used to have to be residents for 2 years. They'd have to reside here for 2 years before they would be eligible to become a state citizen. All of this was undone. And this is the basic backdrop of what we're dealing with now. So now the remonstrance has been served and ignored. Now I'll be proceeding with a federal lawsuit where I'll be challenging what I believe these unconstitutional changes. And that's the basic update. So that's where we're at now.
Now, one of the things that support what you're saying, but in a different vein, Danny, and I was going to talk about this a little bit. This morning, I think it was either yesterday morning, on the news, they said the state of New Hampshire hit a record number of homicides. And they went on to say that the Attorney General suggested that they hire 4 new prosecutors in the state to handle the volume. And I thought to myself, great, let's grow the size of government because they're so competent. And let's pay for 4 prosecutors. But how is that going to fix the problem of the increased number of homicide? Why don't they just change the live free or die state to the die state? Wouldn't that be appropriate? It would be more appropriate than firing 4 prosecutors, is what I'm saying. Every time something happens, they grow the size of the government by throwing money at it. They don't fix the problem.
Hey, Richie, murdering someone is illegal, isn't it?
Geez, I don't know. I have to check with a lawyer. Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Well, there's a law that says that thou shalt not kill.
Exactly.
And what's going on? It's getting worse.
Well, that's because there's no court of record, and the bar establishment, and this is I'm saying this, no one else, the bar establishment and anybody who pays dues to that organization is contributing to the destruction of this country. And until people stand up, and I'm talking about lawyers and judges, and say enough is enough, unless they want to live in a Wild West, you know.
Well, why isn't the Attorney General recommending we hire more law enforcement to prevent the murders in the first place to reduce his caseload?
Well, the Attorney General didn't do that, but the mayor of Manchester did, and I believe they hired 4 new officers. I don't believe we need new officers. I believe we need to look at the corruption that exists in our government because people are so fed up with it. Dan, this is just my contention. They're so fed up with it that they feel a sense of hopelessness. All right, you got thousands of homeless people showing up here in Manchester down the street. Why? You got a record number of suicides across America. It's an epidemic in America. No one's talking about it, though. Look up the numbers. Look at the CDC if you think I'm wrong. That's just with gun deaths. Suicides are at an epidemic number. No one's talking about it. Now we're at homicides reaching a level, at least in New Hampshire. I don't know about the other states. Is there anything wrong with that? I think so. I think we got a problem. And continuing to take my money and Dan's money out of our pockets and say, we'll fix the problem, we'll throw money at it, we'll build the size of the state government. Now, I don't think that's going to work too well. It hasn't worked in the past 100 years since we've been spiraling downhill. Well, that's my contention.
Well, they've taken God out of school and given us government.
Yeah.
So government's replacing God and the moral fabric and the moral fiber of teaching some form of morality. I'm not here to preach religion whatsoever, but the point is that under the Judeo-Christian principles that founded this country, people were raised from the time that they can read until they leave their mother and father, that thou shalt not kill or thou will burn in hell. And removing what was considered, the 10 Commandments do make up some of what is considered the common law. And so these are common principles that the progressives have told us we don't need.
Well,
we don't need God. We don't need any religion. We just need more government.
2 points.
And we're looking at the consequences of those actions.
2 points about that. And Paul Harvey said it in the last couple shows that we had. Our Father who art in Washington. You just said it, Dan. They're taking God out of the country and replaced it with government. How true can that be? By the way, Paul Harvey said that in 1965. Not today. Paul Harvey's deceased. This was 1965 when he did it on his radio show. And the other thing, which I lost my train of thought, but I wanted to mention, the court of record had a lot to do with what you were just saying. The principles of, I'm sorry, it came back to me. My senior moment is over. The Constitution, both state and federal, do not mention murder. Why do you think that is? Because we're a moral society, and we as a people are supposed to understand, no, you don't go up and kill somebody, you don't rape somebody, you don't rob somebody. Those are things that moral people don't do to one another. You don't need to have it written. It's common amongst us.
Well, not only that, but the point is that based, the state constitution for many years until they removed the descriptive language said if you weren't a Protestant, you couldn't be in office. And so, again, the emphasis on morality, that teaching children from the time of birth on up until adulthood, that certain things, again, the Ten Commandments, which were written in stone,
Yep.
are fundamental principles. And this has been lost. Instead, what they've done is they've taken, you got to understand something too, Richie, and I know you know this, so I'm going to say this for the audience's purposes. The states came first. October 31st, 1783, the Treaty of Paris. If you go read if you go to, there's an excellent website that Yale Law School has called Avalon. And in there, most of our original documents are in there. And if you go and read the Treaty of Paris, he relinquished all claims on the land of North America where he had established colonies. Why is that important? Because all 13 of the original colonies that are declared in the Declaration were all attempting to establish a common law system that has its foundation in the 5 instruments that Richie has covered before, that Chris Anhall does a great job of explaining the genealogy of not only the federal constitution, more importantly, the state constitution. All the state constitution were based on common law. And common law is derived from the people, and it is an extension of, again, those 5 critical documents. But more importantly is the creation of the federal government 4 years later is the creation of an admiralty jurisdiction to deal with international law. And this is completely separate from the role of the states. The states are where you have your constitution that protects your rights and liberties, and it's a common law function. And the federal government is to deal, as James Madison say, with the external matters and affairs of the states, to conduct war, negotiate peace, contract international treaties, and regulate international commerce. It didn't have, and it was prohibited from intervening and interfering with the states. That line has long been blurred. And that's fundamentally what we deal with now, is that the states have been neutered. Their sovereignty exists in name only. And this is what we find in the election problem, because, again, in order to exercise your common law right of elective franchise, the right of suffrage, the right to vote, in New Hampshire now, and this is part of the lawsuit, they're converting citizens of the state by coercion and omission to being citizens of the United States instead of citizens of the state. Common practice in a contract is what? Is that the parties to the contract have to be named if the instrument is to be binding. What do we got going on here? Why are they trafficking your person to consenting to being in federal jurisdiction? I digress.
Well, I don't know if you want to talk about the word state and what they've done to it here in New Hampshire. Danny, you know a little bit more about that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, on top of defining you as a citizen of the state of New Hampshire, they've also removed and redefined state. The government printing office style manual, English manuals over the principles of style of grammar, all say the same thing. A proper noun is styled with proper capitalization. The state constitution, when it was ratified, used the capital S to define the state, or reference to the state of New Hampshire, and the state of New Hampshire itself is capital S, capital N, capital H. That's a proper noun. Well, what they did is, along the way, can only look at the legal society for this, did what? They changed the definition of state by statute. Statute 21.4 gives it a new definition. Now, if it's not broken, and it's been almost 200 years, why are they fixing something that technically isn't broken?
And they don't have the authority to fix.
On top of that,
Right.
they amended the state constitution 96 times by replacing all reference to state to a lowercase s. They changed the style of the governor, they changed the style of the courts, and they changed the oath of allegiance for all elected officials. And now we have almost 10,000 statutes that are all written for the statutory state, not the sovereign state. How'd that happen?
Well,
Who let that happen?
Can I tell you one way it's happened?
Yeah.
And I'm including myself in this, so I'm not trying to offend anybody, but our ignorance has got us there. Because of our English and grammar skills, or the lack thereof, they changed these things and we didn't pay attention to it. I mean, I'll speak for me. I looked at the word state, small s and large s, didn't mean anything to me. The word state was still there. I'm talking years ago now. Now that I've realized what it means through working with Dan over the past 3.5 years or so, it's like, oh, Jesus, no wonder. And you start looking at other words and you find out the all capital name on your driver's license and birth certificate. What does that mean? It's your ens legis, okay? It's the way they traffic you through the system. They're not even talking about you because it's an artificial person or a corporate entity. However you want to look at it. Look up the definition of the word person and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Well, let's give you two examples of the word state in a lowercase that actually apply. State of mind. State of mind, the proper spelling would be a lowercase s. Or referring to the states, plural, not one specifically, would be a proper application of a lowercase s because it's not a proper noun. Mm-hmm. And all of these changes in their totality, when you look at the way the state government currently functions, they're telling you exactly what's happening to you. You're no longer a citizen of a state. You're now a citizen of the United States without understanding what that means. And that's why they call you a resident, a New Hampshire resident, because a resident does not, the word resident only appears in our state constitution in one place, Article 5, Part 2, form of government, and it confers in contradistinction. Remember, the state constitution was ratified October 31st, 1783. So exactly what was going on, oh, let me correct something. I used the wrong date. The Treaty of Paris was September 30th. The state constitution was ratified 30 days later. But the important part is that it was written at the time there was no federal government. Each state was sovereign when they wrote their own constitutions. So when the word resident is only used one time, it exists, but why didn't they put it in the Bill of Rights? They only used the language the people, the citizens, the inhabitants.
Okay, we got to wrap it up. All right, that's a very good question, and I don't know if we're going to answer it today. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the Inform America station, like us on Facebook, check out inform-america.org, our website, and get involved with the nationallibertyalliance.org. Thank you to Dan Richard for being with us. I
welcome.
appreciate your time and your info, Dan.
You're welcome.